We are at the peak of the southeast flood season and getting closer to the end of the dry season in Florida. Jeff, Josh, and I will talk about our climate, meteorology, and hydrology in the short, medium, and long term in the March 13th edition of the Water Resources Outlook.
So let's look at past precipitation, and we see for the most part most areas near normal, looking at the last 30 days. Recent wet weather has put parts of the Carolinas above normal by more than an inch, as we see in the darker green there, while parts of northern Mississippi and northwestern Alabama, they're looking at deficits of more than 2 inches. This includes the far upper Tombigbee River basin, which we will show the stream flows here shortly. Looking back 90 days, we see very much the same pattern. Near normal, most areas, maybe a bit above normal in the parts of the Carolinas, as well as the lower Suwannee and Santa Fe rivers, river basins there in North Florida, in the North Florida Peninsula. Deficits of more than 4 inches in the upper Tombigbee there in northern Mississippi, also apparent for the last 90 days. So how does all that translate to stream flows? Well, let's look at the 28-day average stream flows, and we see most gauges reporting in the normal range, with the exception of the lone dry area there in northern Mississippi. That's the upper Tombigbee Basin, where stream flows are reporting running below normal. With the normal rainfall, drought has not been a concern. Some pockets of abnormally dry weather, but for the most part, we are not worried about drought right now in the southeast. What we are a bit more worried about is flooding potential, as we are in the peak river flood season for the southeast region as a whole. We have a half a dozen more weeks before we get out of the typical river flood season for the southeast. The season usually ends as we get into mid-April, when rainfall tends to decrease as the jet stream shifts north and evapotranspiration increases as the vegetation growth blossoms across the region. Todd will talk more on the potential for higher stream flows and the river flood outlook later in the show. But before then, one last slide from me here. And here's the typical monthly precipitation by state. As I pointed out, all the states see a drop-off in precipitation in April, but then ramp up in the summer. April is actually a lower precipitation month, which helps decrease that river flood potential.
Thank you, Jeff. Let's begin with the short-term outlook, which takes us through Sunday, March 16th. Beginning with the basic flow aloft on March 14th, you see a benign pattern across the southeast United States, with a northern stream trough across the upper Great Plains starting to approach from the west. The corresponding surface pattern for March 14th shows high pressure across our area, keeping us fairly dry, with a cold front across the Great Plains starting to march its way towards the east. Now, as we move towards March 16th, you see that the trough has amplified significantly across the southern plains and portions of the lower Mississippi River Valley. And what that means at the surface is a low-pressure system will be working its way from west to east across the lower Mississippi River Valley into the southeast United States. Out ahead of that low, we will have several hours of southerly flow across the Gulf of Mexico, which will help to increase the moisture content across the southeast United States in advance of that low-pressure system, which looks to be fairly strong and fairly well organized. Overall, therefore, we do expect a pretty decent round of 1 to 3 inches of precipitation across our area during this period of time. Therefore, the strong upper-level energy and, again, above normal moisture flow result in pretty good precip for the southeast United States through the short term. And as we go to the midterm, you see on Monday, March 17th through Thursday, March 20th, that trough we were previously discussing on March 16th has de-amplified, yet remains across the southeast United States, with yet another trough approaching from the west across the upper Great Plains. At the surface, we're going to have an interesting pattern. The cold front that we were just discussing on March 16th will begin to stall across portions of the southeast United States, generally along the Atlantic coastline and into the Florida Peninsula. At least one round of low pressure, if not more than one, will ride along that surface boundary across the Florida Peninsula and bring repeated rounds of light to moderate precipitation for that area of the southeast, while approaching cold front from the west will impact our weather later on in the midterm. The basic flow aloft, therefore, on March 20th, there was a broader trough across the lower Mississippi River Valley, extending up the Mississippi River Valley towards the north and upper Midwest. And at the surface, yet another cold front will be marching its way. The same cold front we just discussed a couple of days earlier will be marching its way across the southeast United States. However, this front will not have as much moisture to work with and not as much energy as either, so therefore light precipitation is expected along the front. Therefore, the bottom line is potentially active period for Florida and light precip generally everywhere else across our area. So the total basin's precipitation through the short and midterm shows that we are expecting a widespread 1 to 3 inches across the southeast United States, which is very typical of mid-March. The higher confidence for heavier totals of generally 1.5 to maybe as much as 2 to 2.5 inches of rainfall will be across portions of Alabama into the western Florida Panhandle and potentially extending into Georgia. Lower confidence of similar totals across the Carolinas at this time. Nevertheless, another round of heavy rainfall across the northern Florida Peninsula, and overall, again, 1 to 3 inches, which is very, very welcome for this time of year. The long-term outlook, which takes us from March 21st to March 27th, begins with a ridge over Florida and another trough approaching from the west across the Great Plains and upper Midwest. That trough will swing through by March 25th towards and across the eastern Conus. And on March 27th, yet another trough will work its way across the Midwest and portions of the Ohio Valley and lower Mississippi River Valley. So we are expecting several fronts to work their way through this period. And as a result, more rounds of low pressure and good opportunities to get return flow from the Gulf means yet another round of moderate 1 to 3 inches of precipitation generally during this period. The higher totals typically being across Alabama and maybe portions of the Carolinas as well. But anywhere across the southeast, I think a general 1 to 3 inches is very reasonable for the long-term outlook. So therefore, the bottom line is an active pattern is expected to continue through the end of March.
Well, Josh just took us through the end of March and getting close to the end of the flood season in most of the southeast. And so now we'll talk a little bit about the seasonal forecast that gets us through the end of spring. And so you'll look and you'll see over most of the southeast we have equal chances for above normal, near normal, and below normal. Now this was the same forecast we had in our last water resources outlook. And so what they show is a little bit above normal chances in the northern and western part of our areas, or just very near that, and then below normal in the panhandle of Florida and Alabama. And so we're seeing a little bit of that. Actually, we have a little bit more dryness up at the top of the Tombigbee Basin, up where that above normal is. So we'll see how the rest of March through May ends up. But right now it looks pretty normal just based on the recent forecasts. The long-range outlook for March, April, and May for our rivers, as you can see, most of them show at the 50%, below 50% chance in the long range of seeing floods during that time. We have a few above for the minor flood risk, and that's showing a greater than 50% chance of flood risk, and those are kind of in the brown or orangish color, and they're splattered around, especially along the coast as you go from Albany, Georgia, all the way through central Georgia and along the coast where we've had recent rainfalls, and that goes true for part of North Carolina. As Jeff mentioned before, we had some recent rains in there, especially during the last 30 days, and that's kept things kind of wet. So that's kind of why you see some of that for then. And then we look at Central Florida, still pretty dry, and then even in northern Alabama and into northern Georgia and the western Carolinas, more normal type with less of a flood risk in those areas. Now, during neutral ENSO years, we've looked back at the past, and this is kind of what we see during neutral ENSO years. Now, we look at March, and we see above normal stream flows for that time. Well, that's actually kind of panned out so far this year. We've actually had above normal rainfall. We've had some flooding during the month of March, so this is kind of panned out. Being in a neutral conditions right now, we've actually seen above normal rainfall. Elsewhere, most places are showing pretty near normal rainfall. As for April, one of the things that we see for neutral ENSO conditions along the southern part of our area in Alabama and Mississippi and in Georgia, they show a little bit above normal in some of those areas. So we'll be watching April since we continue to be in neutral conditions. Last year I think we had above normal conditions during April in neutral conditions. So we'll watch that and see if that happens. As for Florida, they look like they'll be a little bit below normal during that time, and then a little chance for above normal up in the Virginia, part of the North Carolina area. So our ENSO conditions, I showed this last month, so I won't, or this last water resources outlook, so I won't take too long, but it does show us warming into El Nino conditions, and that's a possibility as we get into the July, August, and September time frame. So they've actually put us under an El Nino watch, so we'll be watching it closely. But as you can see, as we get into that August, September, October time frame, September, October, November, those seasonal forecasts, El Nino is a little bit more. There's a bigger chance for El Nino during that time than neutral, and La Nina doesn't look like much of a chance at all. It does look like those temperatures will warm out in the Pacific, and that we'll at least see neutral and maybe closer to El Nino at that time. And so as for the summer forecast, right now there's nothing to steer us one way or the other. With neutral conditions and maybe going to an El Nino, which kind of dampens a hurricane season, right now it looks like equal chances across the southeast for precipitation. I didn't show the temperature. Temperature right now is looking like above normal during that time, and then that'll impact evapotranspiration out of reservoirs and out of the ground and so forth. So we'll watch that closely. But right now, as far as rainfall goes, looks like a pretty normal summer for 2014.
So the bottom line, in the short term, it looks like normal rainfall, which means the possibility of some flooding in the southeast. As for the long term, near normal as we move through spring and approach tropical season. Again, it looks equal chances for above near normal and below normal rainfall, just because of the uncertainty of hurricane season, especially with the possibility of an El Nino. Our next Water Resources Outlook will be recorded on March 31st. Thank you for joining us on our Water Resources Outlook today. You can find more information at www.weather.gov/SERFC. You can also find us on Facebook. And if you have any questions concerning this or anything else about the River Forecast Center, you can contact me at todd.hamill@noaa.gov.